This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
This very cantankerous lady on my left, who has a silver tongue. Marika Sherwood is a Hungarian-born historian, a researcher, educator and author. In 1991, with historian and Black Cultural Archives trustee Professor Hakeem Adi and other colleagues, she founded what is now known as the Black and Asian Studies Association, in order to encourage research and disseminate information and to campaign on education issues. Apart from her major publications, which include the likes of The Origins of Pan-Africanism, Malcolm X Visits Abroad, April 1964 to February 1965, The Life and Times of Albert Makula White, an African farmer in Kent. She has also contributed to a number of films, radio programs and conferences. Please put your hands together for Marika Sherwood.
I want to say something to what David was saying, or rather add something to it, which is that Britain had terrible problems about what to do in World War II. Was it going to recruit any Caribbeans or not? It's a different story, but this whole business of are we going to permit an African to point a gun at a white person hadn't died out. Then I must say that I won't be staying till 8 o'clock or so, because I live in a small village in Kent and it's going to take me 2 hours to get home. And I'm getting to be too old to get home very late. The next thing I want to say is that seeing the audience here, I have rethought a little about what I should be talking to you about. And that is partly because the number of white people in the audience is, I think, very appropriate. The number of white speakers, I think, tells us something else, which is about the lack of the teaching of the history of Africa and of people of African origins and descent in this country, whether you're looking at schools or whether you're looking at universities. And I think this, to me, is personally terrible. So let me tell you why it is so very personal to me. I come from a Hungarian Jewish family and we lived in Budapest during the war. And what was left of us emigrated to Australia in 1948. There were quite a lot of Hungarians there. It was full of people fleeing from Europe, a bit like Syrians fleeing today. But nobody in schools or anywhere knew anything about Hungary. So it was very important to me that I had had some years of schooling in Hungary. As a Jewish child, I couldn't go to school during the war, but I could go after the war, and I had to take exams so that I could get up to where I should be by my age group. So you can imagine I read and read and read and read. And it was so important to me that I knew something about me. I wasn't an Australian. And that sense also was very strong when I came to this country in 1965. Because here the ignorance about Hungary was just as profound as it was in Australia. But I am Hungarian. I'm not English. But I need to know about Hungary for that sense to be deep inside me. For me to be proud of that, even if I don't like the Hungarian government of today, which is appalling, but I'm still a Hungarian. I learned something else that I realized how important it was when I came to this country to teach in schools, and this was the mother country. That's what you learn in the Australian schools or the Commonwealth schools. Wonderful mother country. And you go to teach in schools, and you are told, oh, well, no, they're all the lower streams. I didn't know what streaming meant, so I inquired, and I said, well, how come they're almost all black? Oh, well, you haven't been here long enough to understand that. So I'm beginning to experience this level of discrimination, which is not what you expect in another country, right? You expect the opposite. And what came back to me about why that was so powerful to me was because part of the Nazi era in Budapest, because you couldn't tell a Jew from another Hungarian, we all looked the same unless you happen to be an Orthodox Jew, and there are very few Orthodox Jews in Hungary. So we had to wear a yellow star on our clothes. And that meant that other Hungarians, to make themselves look good in the eyes of now the Nazis lining the street, would name call you and spit at you, which is very new. It hadn't happened before the Nazi era came in at all. But then when Christians baptized you to save your life and you had a new name, you took off the yellow star and I could again walk in the streets. And I was remembering that, working with my black kids, because they couldn't take off the color of their skin. And I could take off my yellow star and just be equal with everybody else. And that was, it was like being slapped like this with that pain of what it had been like for me, and that I could get away from it. Now, because of what was going on in the schools, and I felt so very angry, I decided that for some of the kids who were in my third form and had been in the bottom stream since they got to this comprehensive high school, Hampstead Comprehensive School, and they were going on to take their then next exams, that they needed some extra lessons because they hadn't been taught at all. The other teachers had done what I had been told to do by the headmaster. Just keep them quiet. You don't have to teach them, just keep them quiet. Well, I was there to teach, not to keep people quiet. So I said to my third form, you need a lot of catching up to do. Do you want to stay behind after school a couple of afternoons? We'll do some catching up so that you pass the exams well. I said, oh yes, please, miss, yes. And after a couple of weeks, the caretaker comes in and says, are you keeping these people in? I said, no, we're having extra classes. You can't have extra classes here. Out. So I said to them all, well, the only thing we can do is, I live only a mile away. If you can walk that far, you can come to the flat where I live, and we'll all squeeze in there. It was a large flat, which I shared with a number of other people, including a Nigerian. He was an Igbo, but was living in Lagos. So they came there, and that introduced me to some history that I didn't know, because of course in Australia you learn nothing about Africa or the colonies. I didn't even know where the West Indies were. That's sort of Commonwealth education for you. But Nandi, my Nigerian flatmate, said to me after the first time all these kids were there, what are you doing with all those slaves here? I said, all those what? He said, all those slaves from the West Indies. I don't want to have anything to do with that. When I had introduced him to the kids said to me, an African savage? Miss, you share a single flat with an African savage? So I had a lot of thinking and reading to do, and very shortly after this, we had a formal introduction of Nandi to all my third form pupils. And I left them for a long discussion, having produced lots of cakes and drinks, all soft drinks, so that they could get to know each other. But that was my introduction in a way to, you're not all the same, just because your skin color is the same, just as the English were very different to me. My kids of Jamaican or Barbadian or other Caribbean descent had a different history from Nandi's history and had been taught to look at the world. So they talked with each other and began to learn from each other, and I began to learn from them. And went on a long journey. And what took me to writing history was being on duty in the playground once when we were celebrating the E-Day. And I don't know why the Caribbean kids' parents have taught them nothing about their contributions to the war, but they hadn't, because I was on playground duty and there's this big name calling going on with the white kids saying, "Your fathers did sweet F all, you know, we won the war, we won the war." And the black kids have no answer. So the white kids, of course, go on teasing them. And eventually a fight develops, so I have to go in and separate them because I'm on playground duty. And I say, right, you're all coming up to my classroom and I'm going to tell you about World War II, just the bit I know about it, and who fought for it, and what it was like for me to have the bombs coming down on me. But when I thought about it, I thought, what am I going to do to put knowledge in the hands of kids so that you don't fight with your fists, you fight with knowledge. And that sort of stayed in me and as life went on. And eventually, my friend Colin Prescott, some of you may know him in the Institute of Race Relations and the lecturer at the Polytechnic of North London, where I was then working, said to me, "Well, Marika, it's no use coming to me to tell me that all this history needs to be researched. Why don't you get on and do it?" And I said, "I'm not a historian." And he said, "It doesn't matter. If you think it's important, you will do some research." So I want to say the same to you. I had no training in history whatsoever. I did go to university, not to study history. You do know it is not that difficult. And there is so much history that needs to be researched. So I'm now going to say something to you about the Pan-African Congress in 1900. Because one of the issues there is, I looked through all my books and articles, not just what I've written, but what everybody else has written, sitting on my shelves, which are all going to the Black Cultural Archives, by the way, when I die, to see, well, how many organizations were there in 1900? What do we know? And I thought, well, I'm not finding anything. There were some student organizations in some universities in Edinburgh and Liverpool, for example, and it looks as if perhaps even in Oxford. But I couldn't find any research on community organizations. And I thought, now why is that? By 1900, we would have had quite large communities, at least in all the seaports, because most of the early settlers, as far as we know now, at that time of our history, were seamen. At least 30% of the merchant marine had seamen from the colonies. How many the Royal Navy had, we don't know, because for a long time they denied to me that they had any, until I actually sent them some information I found in the National Archives. So they had to admit that maybe I was right, and they did have some in the Royal Navy, but as far as I can get at them, they still haven't done any research. So I don't know how many were in the Royal Navy. But the thing about the merchant marine is, of course, the men were discharged when the ships landed because the owners of the ships didn't want to pay them while the ships were still in dock. They would rehire them. So many docks had black seamen settling because the whites didn't want them to get jobs because blacks received a lower wage, and the unions objected to this but didn't fight for the equality in wages, which is what you would have thought a union just might do if it wasn't racist down to its, into deep inside its heart. What it tried to do is prevent blacks getting jobs. So a lot of black men had to settle here while they were trying to get jobs, and married local women, because there were not that many black women around, given how I told you a lot of the black men came. Which gives you some indication that at least some white women had no problems with marrying black guys. But how this was received by the whole local community, there's not been enough research on that. We know that in some cases the families disowned the white women, but how often that happened and did that change when they had children? It's quite possible that it did, but we just don't know. The other thing we don't know is how what sort of lives the young children had. You know, how were they received in the schools? So I couldn't find out how unusual what Henry Sylvester Williams did really was, because he came here from Trinidad, but he was actually born in Barbados. So his family emigrated to Trinidad because there was more work available in Trinidad than there was in Barbados, and it was better paid and there was more land available. He then, I can't say trained as a teacher, because in those days, if you finished primary school, that was good enough for you to go and teach in a primary school in the colonies. So he taught, and he ended up going to Nova Scotia to get higher qualifications. And then he came here to train as a lawyer. So he's a many-time immigrant, right? Barbados to Trinidad, Trinidad to America, America to Nova Scotia to Britain, which is quite unusual, I think. The other thing unusual about him is that his parents weren't rich. And when he came here to train as a lawyer, it's very clear from the research I did that he was much, much older than the other African and West Indians here at Gray's Inn, training to become barristers, which to me indicates that most of them would have come from much richer families than Williams came from. Now, did that cause any problems? We just don't know. How was he, as a Barbadian Trinidadian, received? Don't forget, Trinidad was a very multicultural society. It had been a Spanish colony, and then a lot of the French went to settle there before the British took it over. So French and Spanish were spoken, and then English, and there were imported Indian conscript laborers, as well as the remainder of local people. So he comes from a very multicultural society, which might have helped him to cope with what he was facing here. So let me read to you the kinds of things he was facing here that I found. This is from things being written at that time. The colonial secretary says, "The British race is the greatest of governing races that the world has ever seen," right? Professor Froude of Oxford University, so this is what students at universities are being taught, says, "On the continent of Africa were another race, savage in their natural state, which would domesticate like sheep and oxen." Remember, he says which, not who, but which, and he's talking of people. "The Negro never rose of himself out of barbarism." And so he goes, I won't read you the rest, you can imagine what it's like. So that's what they were confronting at that level of society. How that went down to the lowest levels hasn't also really been researched. I don't know what was taught about race or racism or colonies in schools in the 1900s at all. Now, because Williams faced all of this, and I think given his background and experiences, he realizes that people ought to get together to struggle against this. So he brings people together, everybody that he can get hold of, to form something they call the African Association. to struggle against racial discrimination here and in the colonies. They end up calling a conference in 1900, which is about that, and I will, if I can find it, read you the aims of the association. One of the things they wanted was to instruct the members of Parliament that the better treatment of native races should command greater attention in Parliament. That was one of the things they were interested in. Then they said that the association is deeply sensible of the absence of any body of Africans in England representing native opinion in national matters affecting the destiny of the African race, so they have to organize themselves in order to encourage a feeling of unity, to facilitate friendly intercourse among Africans in general, to promote and protect the interests of all subjects claiming African descent, wholly or in part, in the British colonies and other places, especially in Africa, by circulating accurate information on all subjects affecting their rights and privileges as subjects of the British Empire. Now, I think that the dispersion of, or circulation of accurate information on the subjects of the empire is as important today as it was in 1900, and I don't know that we have progress very much at all. Now, the conference that they held was very well attended, partly because there were other conferences going on in Europe that the workers here knew that there would be African and African American workers attending. And so they came here, and it was well written up, and I'm sorry I don't have pretty pictures, but you can pass this around. This is just from the Colored America in Washington writing up the conference. So that's how much publicity they got. It was written up all over America and all over the Caribbean, and on the back is a pretty picture of Williams himself. So they were very successful, and they continued trying to find ways of uniting people. Williams went and traveled all over the Caribbean, and they set up local organizations there. He published a journal called the Pan-Africa, of which not nearly enough copies have remained. I think he published 3 issues, but I've only got a copy of 1. And when I was in Trinidad and Jamaica, I asked everybody, does anybody have copies? He had an organization here that he had set up, but nobody could find copies. Now, we don't quite know why, but the association, which renamed itself Pan-African at about the time of the conference, because it realized that it was bringing everybody together who was from Africa or of African descent. It died in 1902. Williams qualified as a barrister, went to work in South Africa for a while, and traveled very widely, and in fact came back as a representative of a number of organizations in Africa who thought they could use him to take their issues to the governors. Sorry, to the government here. Total waste of time, of course. I mean, you can write letters, even occasionally have a meeting, and you're treated very politely, and your hand is shaken, and that's it. So after a while, he gave up and went back to Trinidad, worked as a barrister, also began to participate in politics there, but was died very young. So that's Pan-Africanism. I should tell you that the book is still available. It is not me who called it The Origins of Pan-Africanism, it's the publishers, because I don't think Sylvester Williams was the origins. I think there were other people who had been thinking about the need for unity. But he is, I think, certainly very important, and I wish local people from all over England would try to follow up what they were doing, because Williams and other members of the association travelled all over England, taking their aims with them and recruiting people to join. So there should be accounts in local papers around the country, and there might be memories passed down within families of these people who came and talked about Pan-Africanism and unity and struggle for equality, but it hasn't been done. So thank you very much for listening to me.
One more time, round of applause. Marika Sherwood. I did hear you say that, but I'm sure that we have some questions for you. And you put out so many ideas out there, and you inspired us so much. And the thing that stayed with me the most is the story about you being able to take off that star, and then some of the black children will be able to take off who they are. Yeah, that stayed with me really strongly. I work a lot in schools. And the idea that we can all do research, the idea that we can do it. It wasn't there, it wasn't been done, let's go and do it. Yeah, so.
We absolutely have to. And I'm sorry if I'm not here to answer your questions.
You will be.
I'm sure.
I'm doing security as well.
I'm sure Paul can give you my email address, and I'm happy to answer emails. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.